welcome to season 3, episode 2 of LiveLunch. I've been away in Spain, but it's been beautiful. And I'm back now. I'm back for the term. How's your holiday been?
Yeah, sorry, I've got half a mouthful of celery, so I'm not going to answer that question.
Perfect time to answer.
Yeah, I'll come back to me.
We've got food from The Joker, by the way. Wings. I'm a big fan of chicken wings at The Joker. I had a really good time holiday, thanks for asking. Did you ask me how my holiday was? I don't think you did.
No, I didn't ask
Obviously
you. I think
you don't care
asked
about
me,
me.
and I didn't ask you.
Yeah.
I think you asked me, and I gave some quite full disclosure on how good my holiday was. And
and then we moved on.
I intentionally
Were not interested in finding out about my summer break.
I think you may have even tried to talk about it, and I think I may have stepped in.
Yeah, shut up.
That's not what we're here for. This is not about that.
No. I went to Devon with my wife, without the kids, for 4 days, which was lovely.
Oh, nice.
I love my kids a lot, but having a few days without them and just with my wife is special. So we were on the coast in Devon.
Devon.
Lovely.
I like Devon. I do, and I like that whole area.
Did you read any good books whilst you were on holiday?
Me? I read a few.
Anything that you recommend?
I recommend Interpreting Scripture with the Great Tradition by Craig Carter. That's a Ladybird book. Mm-hmm. No, it was.
Does it have pictures?
I read it on my Kindle, so I don't get to see pictures much on my Kindle. I read a great history of France because I was in France, and I thought I need to just get
brush up
into
on the
this.
history.
Yeah, it was. I really enjoyed it. Good, shortish whole French history from the ancient times to Charles de Gaulle in 45. And a few other things, a couple of novels and things, but I enjoyed it. I was just finished reading Moby Dick over the summer, which is just an extraordinary book. Kind of tedious in lots of ways, very tedious book. I don't know whether to recommend it or not. It's kind of also, it's astonishing as well. It's kind of both. Got lots of boring bits, but lots of.
I feel like
bits.
by virtue of you saying it on a TV show, on a YouTube show that goes out live to 5 people, you have recommended the book.
Right. I think someone should make a Netflix version of Moby Dick. Someone should do that. Someone should do a box set of it. That would be fascinating if someone could do it properly. I think people have tried to make films of it and done a bad job. But
talking about making Netflix shows, have you ever come across Top Boy on which I think he played on maybe Channel 4 or something in 2012, 2013? They did 2 seasons and then canned it. And then Drake Instagrammed a picture from the show, and somebody got back to him or commented saying, "Do you know the show's been cancelled?" And he somehow managed to convince the bosses at Netflix to do another episode. Yeah. So Drake, if you're watching this, Moby Dick, you've obviously got the power and the influence to make stuff happen.
Next project on my desk on Monday.
Yeah. Joel's gonna put we don't need to write a script because we've got stuff in there.
Hello.
Hey. Welcome to a new person serving us coffee. Thank you for coffee.
Very nice. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. So we should crack on.
I also read a really good book, by the way.
Oh yeah. Sorry, I should have asked you.
Yeah.
It's a really
I'm doing a Joel.
It was on the life of C.T. Studd.
Oh yeah.
Missionaries, and I just highly recommend to anyone. It's a really small book, but it's really inspiring to read, so, especially if you're thinking of going to be an evangelist. And definitely go read it.
Brilliant.
Or have a career in cricket and want to
Yeah, that's right. You're going to score centuries for England. You need to read it. It's a very good book.
Who's kicking us off? Megan, are you kicking us off?
Yes. So we had the last preach that we had on Sunday was on Tomorrow on Your Mind. So, Joel, can you...
When are you doing Suckle on Your Mind?
Oh, no.
Suckle. Well, when the time is right to bring up the theme of suckle, and it's just quite a sensitive subject, so I'm going to choose to sound very carefully.
Sorry.
Can you do a quick 30-second summary?
No.
A 1 minute summary?
I'll do my best.
Okay.
We were talking about... what were we talking about? Stress was the first week, the second week was tomorrow. Really the anxiety that we feel about the future, and the way we talked about it, the way I talked about it. I shouldn't really say we. It sounds like I'm the queen. The way I talked about it was the different kinds of anxieties that we have about the future. Jesus deals with them by slowing us right down. And it's kind of not what we'd expect the teaching to be, but he says, look at the birds, consider the flowers, the lilies. it's if you stop and think about it, it's a curious thing to choose to say, but I think there's genuine wisdom in stopping to consider and look at the way that God truly intends his involvement in all creation, that God is sovereignly involved in every tiny detail. God knows exactly what he's doing to the most minute degree. And this is Jesus sharing the heavenly kind of worldview. And we tend to think of God as either being inside creation and therefore not really in control of it, or outside of creation and therefore kind of in control of it from the outside, but not really involved in the real detail, the real kind of, because all he's done is he's set it up and then let it, push it along the ground like a kid's toy. Just push it along and see which way it goes. But the God of the Bible is deeply involved in every detail, and that's part of our healing. As far as Jesus is concerned, it is healing for the soul, like good for us on a deep emotional level. It will free us from worry when we get to come to terms with the God's perfect sovereignty over every detail, which is kind of not what we'd expect, I think. We're kind of a bit scared of the sovereignty of God because we've got a lot of questions about it, like, how can you be in charge if bad things happen? That doesn't make sense. And so we struggle with it. But Jesus isn't ashamed of it. He's like, no, you've got to come back to this because it will actually set you free from anxieties if you know. Yeah, so that's kind of a...
I hope you appreciate that on a preach that was based on the birds of the air who were eating chicken wings.
Oh, and also...
We're considering the birds very carefully. Consider the birds. Look, behold them.
Rachel Felling would like
So
to know
tasty.
what your favourite bird is.
Chicken.
No chicken, no. My favourite bird is... do you know what? It's a good question. My favourite bird? Eagles. The reason I'm ready with an answer is because my daughter Joni always asks... She asks me most weeks at some point, what's your favourite animal, what's your favourite bird specifically. She's animal crazy, so... yeah.
If someone...
What's your favourite bird, Megan?
Oh,
I've learned from...
You know what? I think flamingos are really pretty.
I think flamingos look pretty from a distance and in pictures, but when you go up close to a flamingo, it's not. The pink is just covered in mud.
It's all just kind of PR.
There we go.
Yeah, it's not.
Flamingo
Photoshop.
PR.
You get close and, it's not what it should be.
On a slightly more deeper tone, what if someone was struggling with like stress of tomorrow? What would you say to them as an advice for that?
I would say listen to the message from... No, I'm trying to think of a boil it down thing. To be honest, I wouldn't say lots at first. I'm not being trying to be clever, but I would honestly not say much at first. I would just keep asking, tell me what is going on, and I guess you're kind of looking for as much of an awareness of what are the genuine fears and what are the yearnings and the hungers and the desires in the heart that are being exposed by the fear and the anxiety. Because sometimes we don't realise it, but generally our anxieties and fears are they're a manifestation of a desire that we have, and a hope and a longing that we have, or if I really want to be safe and comfortable, then I will really be frightened of physical pain or things going wrong physically. And that's, if I'm really want to be accepted and affirmed by people, then the thing I'll be frightened of is any kind of criticism, any kind of being judged. And very often, if anxieties are going into overdrive, it part of the process at least is helping people to identify that there's a desire there. There's something that's become maybe inordinately dominant. It's a desire that's kind of grown so much, perhaps without us realizing it. We've become obsessive about I can't fail this, I can't, because I must have. And I think Jesus comes into our life, and it's right there in chapter 6 of Matthew. Why are you so anxious? Why? And it's like he's trying to help us to look for ourselves underneath. What's the thing that's being threatened? What's the desire that feels vulnerable? And he'd say, do you not know that you don't need that as much as you think you do? What you need is a father who's got everything and is providing. So I try and go around it those ways. So,
That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. There is that verse in the Bible that talks about teach me, Lord, how to number my days. And my question is, how do you balance living for today and being faithful with what God's given you now versus planning for tomorrow? Or do we see those as two separate things, or do they all beautifully come together? And so you will now tell us.
Yeah, I think that the line that's drawn seems to be between planning that is stewardship, faithfulness, and planning that is driven by anxiety and fear, driven by a sense of there's no one looking out for me. God's not looking out for me, so I have to plan because no one else will. And the somebody who's thinking that way, it's hard to judge this, right? Because we're quite keen on externals and judging by externals, and people can behave in a way that looks anxious, but actually they're not necessarily being anxious in the way that Jesus is talking about, and vice versa. Someone might be behaving in a completely kind of relaxed way and seem to have zero concerns in the world, but actually underneath they're affected by anxiety enormously, and it's not always that helpful to just fix on the external signs. Sure. I would have thought. I think in my life I often would have come across as very relaxed when actually underneath I know that I'm not.
When you're on LiveLunch.
Like when I'm on LiveLunch, I like to present this kind of image. I think we habitually do that. So we've got to be careful of that. Jesus isn't saying don't plan. He's saying don't work, because we know from the passage itself. He's talking about animals that clearly do plan and clearly do work. Birds do anyway. Lilies don't. They don't plan at all. Have you noticed that? They don't build nests. They're lazy.
I had to notice the lilies of the field.
They're lazy.
I know.
But birds.
I'm so not like Christ.
Yeah.
If anybody thought I was the Messiah, this is one of those clear indicators that I'm not.
This is a discovery we're coming to terms with. It's quite devastating. Anyway, so the key thing is actually the driving motive. So where's the anxiety coming from? Where's the motive to be forward planning come from? Because someone who never plans for the future. Jesus himself said, if you don't build a tower without first deciding on how much you're going to need, you plan, you count the cost of a project before you get into it. You make decisions based on what's before you. You do need to be wise about the practical realities. And planning financially and all the rest, it's fine, it's good. But you can do that because you're trying to steward, you're trying to serve people. I want to plan my money so that I can give more away. I want to plan my money so that I can do more with it for the kingdom of God. I can do more. I can have more fun with it for God's purposes. I can bless people. I can help my kids and their kids and all the rest. And so in the name of being spiritual, I mustn't just be relaxed and lazy about my money, for example. Because then all that could happen is then I end up being a problem for other people who want to look after me because I didn't make any good decisions because I was being spiritual in a false kind of way.
So you touched on money, and I know we've got money on your mind as one of the teaching topics a few weeks away. But if I could quickly ask you, that story where the widow gives her last 2 bits of coinage, can't remember what the metal element of the coin was, and Jesus honors her. So it does seem to say, give when it's the only option, when there's nothing else that you can do. Give your money. How would you help people with that decision of, I've got a certain amount of money, I've obviously got costs to live and what have you, and I've got the gift day coming up, or we talk about giving to church, and I feel, or I'm convinced that I need to be giving to church. But if I do that, it's going to have a significant cost on me in the future. How would you help people come to a wise decision?
Yeah, I guess without saying too much, because we will come to this, I think it's having a perspective on life where you're saying, my resources are for God. My resources aren't even mine anyway. They're God's resources. He's lending them to me. They're not mine, and so they belong to Him. And so giving back to Him is totally appropriate. But because these things belong to God, I'm also going to look after them in His interest. And one of His interests is going to be you and your survival, for example. So just stewarding the gifts that God gives you for the sake of being able to do other things is not wrong. The issue is that what does it betray? am I holding money back from the offering because I don't trust Jesus? Or am I holding money back from the offering because Jesus has told me to put money aside for X, Y, and Z, for things that are necessary and appropriate, and things that are very much in tune with his heart, his desires and his best for life. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it comes
I
back
think
to
it does.
emotions again. It's help. It's seeing all of all the resources that come through our hands as for him.
I have one last question, and then Megan, over to you if you have any questions.
5 minutes left.
We've recently planted a church. In the past few years, we planted a church in Amsterdam and in Ottawa, and recently our friends Janusz and Camilla moved to Krakow in Poland, and then we've got a church plant in Belfast maybe next year, and I'm sure more we do that. What would you encourage people, or what wisdom would you give people who are considering the option of going maybe church planting with them, but very aware that I don't have a plan in place, I don't have a job, I don't have the finances or the resource to make it happen, but maybe there's something stirring in my heart. How do I lay aside my fears and my anxieties about what the future has in store to make those radical steps of faith? Now, church planting is an obvious one, but there could be loads of other situations in life where people are thinking about doing things which they rightly so could feel a stirring from God, or by being inspired through the stuff that we say and teach. How would you help them make those decisions?
Yeah, I think making decisions about the future and God's will for the future, that's going to involve getting good advice and reflecting over it with other people who you trust, who know Jesus, who love Jesus, who can help you with that, and can maybe help you away from some of the dangers and naiveties. So if you really love God and you're just all out for him, you're just flat out for him, you're going to be susceptible to making decisions that are naive, not because it's wrong to trust God, but you just don't necessarily know yourself. If I think, well, I'm going to drop everything and go and plant a church, I might need someone to come alongside me and say, well, that's clearly not your gift. That's clearly not what you're good at particularly. You're good at this, not that. So, yeah, and so that's why church is important. Community, family, friends, advice. There's safety in advice. In the book of Proverbs specifically talks about that. So wisdom from the people around us that God gives us, and testing the call that we have. If we feel like, I'm called to do this, well, be wise about it. Check it out. Jesus himself trained his disciples through a process before sending them out into all the nations. And the David that kills Goliath is the one that's already fought with lions and bears, had his earlier battles. There are people who they may well be called to go and plant something, but they haven't actually served in their local church. They haven't given themselves to ministry in a way that will stretch them and test them and give them some good knocks, give them take some of the edge off them and help them to grow in some of those simple areas. So there's a lot of just processing and time that's important, but that none of that takes away from the faith thing, because in reality, whenever we do, if we are called to go out in a pioneering situation, it will be against a backdrop of uncertainty. It just will. That trusting God will involve risk, because He will see to it that there are gaps, there are things that we just don't have all the information about. That doesn't mean we're being irresponsible. We need to do it with wisdom and with help, with advice. But there'll be times where it's like, okay, I don't know, I don't have anything close to 100% information, but I know enough. I know that I'm called, and I know that God is good, and I'll take this decision.
I think that's the beauty of this, is that we get to work this out through church and through the community that God's placed us in. So very much holding the anxieties about the future to ourselves is dangerous, and at worst could be foolish. Like, no, come on, you're part of a community. Bring the conversation to the table, talk to people, get alongside your leaders and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm feeling, these are my fears, these are my anxieties, what do you think? What does the Bible teach us? Which is why we've called the series On Your Mind. Bring the stuff that's on your mind onto the table. Any other questions from our live audience?
Yes, I have a question. You've talked a lot about tomorrow in the sense of being this long-term tomorrow. But what advice would you have for someone who's thinking more about tomorrow as in Wednesday?
Yeah.
Maybe they've got something big, like, I don't know, an interview, or they're going to be chatting to someone that, something they need to get off their chest. What about literal tomorrow? What can we be doing to prepare for that?
Brilliant. So anxiety, in terms of avoiding anxiety specifically with regard to that, I think this ultimately does come back to the point that Jesus closes the passage we were looking at with, where he says, "Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." We'll be tempted always to be able to have the godlike panoramic view of time, where we can see and therefore anticipate every conceivable threat and danger. And God simply hasn't given us that position, but called us to daily dependence. Don't worry about tomorrow, because what you need to focus on is today and the grace you'll need for today. The concern about tomorrow, what the effect that it can have on me, and I know it's generally true, it sucks me away from my obedience and fruitfulness in the moment, because I'm so obsessing about what's coming that I'm ignoring the things that he's telling me to do, and my mind is so on the future that it's not on the present. I can be using the future almost as a reason to not hear him, not listen, to not be patient and attentive. So the daily routine of saying, God, I trust you today, I'll do today, and you I'm leaving you tomorrow with you. Now that's a discipline and something we grow in. And I think I'm still at the foothills of growing in it, but it's a right target. It's the right way. I think it's the one that Jesus gives us to go with. And I think you kind of see it in some of the Psalms. I in peace I will lie down to sleep. In peace, even in the context of anxiety, there's Psalm 3 and Psalm 4. There's a lot about this. In the midst of pressure, I'll sleep well because I know you've got tomorrow. You've got it. And it's just, I guess that the point he's trying to always train us in is you've got to remember that I've got this. And our instinct is to just assume he hasn't. And it's not a God instinct. The birds don't have that problem. The flowers don't. Lazy as they are, they don't.
Brilliant. What are you speaking on next Sunday?
God willing,
yeah,
I will speak about success and success on your mind. And just the whole thing of are we really stressed out and anxious because am I going to make it? Have I made it? Am I a failure? Am I going to be a failure? That kind of stuff.
Obviously, being a star of LiveLunch, you don't have those problems because you made it. Don't you?
No, I have curly chips, chicken. I made it.
Thank you so much for joining us. Next week we'll be looking at success on your mind and how we cope with the anxieties that surround success. Thanks, it's good to have you back with us.
Yeah, welcome back, Ned.
We've missed you. And have a great week ahead.